Welcome everyone to Podcast Inspiration Day Cape Town. Like I said to a lot of people, we did one of these in Joburg. Most people said, when are you coming down to Cape Town? So I said, okay, let's do it. Let's pull the community together. At the same time, Sean was mentioning the same thing. And we said, okay, let's try to put this together and see. And it's hopefully the first of many. And as we go, we'll grow. But why we want to do these things is because everyone in podcasting works in silos. You know, we kind of do our own thing, and we either write, or we either produce, or we either try to distribute, or we either try to not make money out of it. And it's better to maybe just put everyone's heads together and create a community and just go, okay, well, all of us are good at different things, and let's see what we can do, you know. And this is both my personal mission and also the support of Ultimate Media. And I think Ultimate Media were quite nicely placed in the audio space that people, they don't know where to go independently. So they kind of go to us. And if we know all the independents, we kind of put everyone together. And hopefully we go somewhere and sing Kumbaya and grow this industry into something that all of us believe it can be. And I think that's the main thing. All of us in this room and people who will be listening to this believe it can be way more and much bigger. The format of this is to take a panel conversation because, I mean, what do I know about podcasting? So it's about putting people together that have gone on different podcast journeys in different spaces. I'm going to hand over to each one of them, starting with Simi, to introduce themselves, their podcast. Let's start off there because I'll unpack your journeys as we go. But if each one of you can just kind of like introduce yourself, your podcast. Lindsay doesn't have a podcast, but he's the best sound guy. I told him top 10 in the world the other day.
Give me a while.
Wow.
Top 10, bro. Ron over there is pushing me to start one with him. So
okay, all right. Okay, so there we go. Okay.
Gonna give me a 4-week.
Lindsay's better than AI.
Better. So far.
Okay, I'm Simi. Simi Arif. I have a very popular podcast called Lesser Known Somebodies, where I sit in the streets of Cape Town and I give people 10 Rand to be on my podcast. Hilarious interviews and stuff. I think out of podcast creators, I think I was probably one of the earliest that went into it. I mean, I remember there was a time there was a guys they had a Skype conversation recorded, and it was them, Bald Radio, which was Darren Scott, Gareth Cliff, and then it was me. And then I built out a network called BOC Podcasts, where we focus on diverse voices from diverse people. So it's not like Bruce Whitfield or Eusebius. There'll be people that, there'll be people that you like and have different stories. So we focus on African stories and stuff. We are changing the name of the company though. So I hope to speak about that a bit later. That's me.
I'm Catherine, and I've come from a broadcast background, but
Speak into the microphone.
Sorry. But 3 years ago, I started doing podcasts, and I found that it was just the most amazing medium to be in. I'm an absolute podcast consumer, and I thought, what they're doing in the States and the sort of true crime podcasts that are happening were just riveting. And we've got so many stories in this country that are fascinating, where there've been injustices, where crimes have not been resolved, that I thought this is the perfect place to explore those stories in podcast series. So my focus was on true crime series, looking at specifically the Ingelot story, which was a case of a young woman who was murdered in Stellenbosch, and her boyfriend was accused of the murder, was later acquitted. But once we started to investigate that case from the bottom up, all these years later, it was astounding how shockingly the police had behaved in that case. And through a podcast series, we were able to really take the listener through that journey, because I think a lot of people in South Africa look at Fred van der Vyver and they go, oh, he was definitely guilty. He comes from a wealthy family. They were able to buy him as a freedom, essentially, bring in international experts. And to a large extent, if Fred van der Vyver had not had the backup of his family, he may well be sitting in jail today. And so it was a fascinating experience, because by the end of that podcast series and the end of the investigations we had done, my views had completely changed, and I was very much part of the public believing, well, yeah, he could actually be guilty. And I think, the kind of podcasts like Serial and the kind of podcasts coming out of America are fascinating, can really change outcomes of these stories. So I think it's a great space to work in, and that's what I've been doing for the past 3 years.
Cool. Seriously cool. I am so stoked to be here. My name's Sean. My last name is Lewitz. And yeah, I make a podcast. I make other podcasts. I love playing with audio. I come from a radio background. I worked for the them for a long time. Yeah, and I think through that journey of working on radio and with audio production, I really fell in love with being able to tell stories. And the radio format that I was working on didn't really allow for that. So I've also gone through some major life changes that inspired my podcasts and being able to tell stories that are hopefully stories of resilience and capacity building and trauma relief, recovery and burnout and all sorts of things. I love, now I've forgotten, you mentioned this podcast a little bit, Heavyweight, as a story formatted podcast. I think it's phenomenal. So I really try and craft audio like that. I think I've got a long way to go. So script writing and audio editing and presenting and hosting shows and interviewing people and being able to tell stories has become a real passion for me. So I'm really stoked to be in a room filled with people that also enjoy that sort of thing and be able to geek out with all of you. So thanks for coming to Paolo's party. This is cool.
That's a cool name. We need to make it that. Paolo's party.
I'm Lindsay. I don't have a podcast, as we've established, but I have been doing audio production for close on to 2 decades now. My career started out in radio with KFM doing radio production and the station branding. Worked up in Johannesburg for Prime Media 947 and 702, also doing their station branding. Also had a stint at Smile when they launched, was head of technical operations and head of production there as well. And at some point in that journey, I decided to step out on my own and I started Crossfade Studio. And I've been busy with that for about 6-7 years now. And through that, I still do a lot of radio production, radio branding. I work with the Ultimate Media team. We've been working together for
since you started.
Yeah, so I know Paolo for about 15 years. This guy here in front with the black T-shirt also. He's also one of the long-standing people that I have really good relationships with professionally from an audio point of view. I've also edited and recorded and mixed, quite a bit of podcasts through that time. One of them was a 2-year series on Aris Geer. It was ultimately a radio sort of slot for 10-15 minutes, but with the end view and goal for it ultimately to become a podcast and live somewhere. And that was on climate change. And we recorded over the 2-year period 104 episodes. So it was quite a bit. And so, yeah, I've been doing TV commercials as well. And I also do a lot of radio branding and production for a company in the US called Benstown Branding. I work with them on a weekly basis, and they service better part of 300 stations in the US. So I work on all sort of formats. They just brief me with email, and I deliver the goods the next day or two. So, yeah, I hope I can give some insight.
Well, yeah, because I want Lindsay to bring the purest element to it. Simi, my first interaction with Simi was we both worked at the same radio station at the time. And people were telling me about this kid who's now helping on air, and he just gets it. He's just got a completely different take on radio content, right? But I want to ask Simi, why do you think so many of us who've gravitated towards podcasting have come from radio? Do you think there was anything specific within radio, or
because we sucked at radio? No, just like I jokingly always say that podcasters are generally from radio because like they're misfits. They were there, maybe someone in the building didn't like them, maybe they didn't like somebody, they decided, fuck it, man, I'll do it by myself. Sorry for swearing. And that's how I started listening on Somebody's, was because I couldn't get on air. My station manager at the time, Ravi Naidu, did not want to put me on air. So I said, okay, cool. I used to carry a recorder out and go to cricket matches. And I used to have, that was my first podcast, was called Hansi's Heroes. I would go around and record fans, you know, and then digital audio was a cool thing. And then I went to a podcast festival. I went to a comedy festival. I got invited to perform at Montreal, and I saw my first podcast. So I was like, okay, cool, digital audio. I can do that. But the reason why a lot of people from radio come into podcasts is because it's another ecosystem where you can ply your trades like a radio station, right? But you can do it independently. And I actually call it like a freelancer's dream. If you're a freelancer, you could do the marketing of the podcast, you can do the editing of the podcast, you can host the podcast. There's tons of things to do. You could sell those services. And I think that the specific services that podcasts do need still, it's a young ecosystem. I always say that the grass hasn't been mowed yet here. If you go to America, there's tons of guys that do advertising and podcasts. There's tons of guys that do the engineering. Here, you can still set up your company, set up your piece of land, and be like, yo, I'm mowing this patch. So yeah, that's why I think a lot of radio people stay in it, because maybe, hey, where else do you go, dog?
What more podcast listeners in America than there are South Africans?
Yeah, definitely.
Right? I think it's 120 million podcast listeners in America. But Sean, it's not a freelancer's dream, right? You were kind of like, gave that freelancer's look of fear. Sean's 15, in case you don't know, but he's a freelancer, right? So is it the dream? Is it everything Simi's saying?
I would agree with Simi that definitely there's a sense that being a bit of a misfit on radio. I worked for 15 years in radio and had a really good stint. I hosted the Afternoon Drive show. I won a commercial, one of those SA Radio Award things.
Nice.
That was cool. But then when you're not it anymore, they don't like you. You just get booted. Whether you've done your time, whether you've applied your trade, whether you've grafted for as long as you have, you're good, and then you're all of a sudden you don't fit, whatever decision that might be. So I love the sentiment that stepping out and doing something on a freelance, you do get to use your marketing ideas, because we're all better at marketing than the guys that were doing the marketing of the radio station in the first place. I was about to say Cape Town's original, but I won't. So there are things like that you really get a chance to flex those muscles. Being exceptionally creative with a conversation, and less than somebody is taking that out of a studio and being able to put it in an environment where other people interact with and go, this is weird, this is different. That's so cool. And the radio stations aren't going to take those ideas because they're too innovative in a way. But back to your point, in terms of being a freelance, now it's very scary. Now that I've stepped away from a radio station, 2023 is the very first year in 15 years that I'm not affiliated to a radio station. And that means figuring it all out. Why I really love this concept and being able to get together, it means that there are other people here that also haven't figured it out. And I don't feel so alone in my not having figured it out. It is an exceptionally exciting space, though. I don't know about you, Catherine, but that feeling of being in control of something, creating something, building something, I suppose anybody that's developed a business on their own probably feels the same way. And that's kind of where I feel like podcasting is in South Africa. Independently, hopefully I can do something in terms of monetizing what I do. And that's why maybe I'm applying all of my trades. I have audio production skills. I can interview. I can script. I can do all of the things I used to do on radio, but I can also silo them out to various clients, so to speak. So in a way, yes, it's a dream, but in another way, it's also a bit of a nightmare to try and put that all together.
But Catherine, Sean referenced you. That's a pain though, because you just want to concentrate on what you really do, right?
I think, I'm very happy to be here today because I've just recently gone freelance. So I was working at News 24 and I have decided to go freelance. I really want to focus on different things, and they're very much focused on the news, although they do true crime podcasts. But I really am floundering at the moment, not quite sure where to start. So I've got some great ideas, really want to do these stories, but the question is where they're going to go, who's going to listen to them. It's not an easy space to be in, and I think it'd be interesting to hear when we get to that question of how does one monetize podcasts and how does one actually make a living from it, because the kind of podcasts that I listen to are very high end, and in South Africa, what News 24 was doing, which is their model, is to put a lot of their high quality audio behind a paywall. And that was very frustrating for me, who was producing the podcast, because, any of us can go on Spotify and listen to unbelievable podcasts for free. So why would people, and for them it's working, you know, they're seeing that people are coming and they are subscribing because they did want to listen to Inga Lotz or whatever the case may be. But I don't think that we're there yet where we should be putting things behind a paywall. But then again, how do you make the money? I mean, the kind of podcast and the level that you're hearing from overseas, whether it's Gimlet Media and, Heavyweight, which is incredible. And I mean, they're a small group of people, but the talent is exceptional. And you've got Conviction, The Disappearance of Nusseibeh Hassan. It's a podcast that came out recently. It's just been nominated for an Ambies Award. Absolutely incredible journalism. And it's about the disappearance of a woman. I mean, we have these kind of stories in South Africa all the time. This woman disappeared and nobody reported her missing for 8 years. And then the daughter, who she gave up for adoption, was trying to find her mother, the woman who disappeared, and contacted this journalist and said, "Can you help me?" And that started her journey. And it took her 3 years to put the story together. It is the most magnificent podcast series I've listened to in a very long time. But my question is, who was backing her? Who was supporting her? How did she do it? I'm not sure. I don't know what the answers are there, but you could hear that whoever helped her with that podcast, and at the end, there's this sort of list of people, who were involved in the production, and she was obviously the lead in it. It's sound designers, it's composers, and Simi, Lindsay, Sean, they're the ones with the technical background, and that I think is so key. And
is it a Gimlet podcast? Is it a Gimlet? Yeah. I'll send you the people. They use a company called Salt Audio. I asked the guys from Salt if I could sit in on a meeting once, of a production meeting. Actually, no, at that time they weren't doing Gimlet. They were doing Midnight Miracle, was one of their clients, and I sat in on it. And they have 23 people working on the audio. That's not the talent. That's just the people working on the audio. So if you think, I don't think we'll get to a position like that here, or maybe if you do, it'll be decades where people are going to throw money like that behind something because they know it's going to be a guaranteed success or the story is really, really good. I mean, but like those things you can still do by yourself. As like a lot of my podcast skills are stuff that I've learned by myself with YouTube, with the equipment, with the marketing, and those things are achievable. You're just not going to get to that level because they've got 23 hands working on it.
They've got a team, and what I find, or what I found, particularly working in the environment that I was in, was I was very much alone. What was different about Inga Lotz, and why I would say that particular story and maybe Missing Matthew stood out apart from my other podcasts, which I'd edited myself, literally Googling, how do I do this? Because I was, I'm not a technical person. But with Inga Lotz, I had a co-producer, and his former colleague came in and did the sound, the final mixing, did everything. And it just took it to such a next level. And he did it for us for free, which is amazing.
Send me his number. Yeah.
So sitting on the end here is Lindsay. And I mean, I think, and also listen, if anyone's got any questions, we do have a roving mic. So just pop your hand up and we'll share it around. Lindsay, you and I have had this conversation many times. So yes, there's the hustle about podcasters doing it their own, but you're the guy who you're one of those 23 and you'd have to be all of those 23 probably in our likelihood. For you looking at that kind of do-it-yourself kind of thing, do you feel that could be more of a hindrance in South Africa than a help?
I think so, especially if you're not technically inclined. If you're not sort of, if it doesn't come to you sort of on your own, or you just have a knack for it, I think you chances are, you're going to have to go through a long process of learning how to become efficient at it. The nice thing about going with the sound guy or an editor is that they come with many years of experience of editing, and they're efficient at their programs. And speed, I think, is important, because speed keeps down, if you're paying for a podcast, speed keeps down production cost. The longer you're going to sit on it, the more time you're going to take to edit it. By saying that, someone recording it by themselves, and not really applying some of the very basic recording techniques, and just handing it over to someone like myself to clean it up. If it's badly recorded, it's a noisy background. There's a lot of distortion, which you can't necessarily get rid of easily without applying a lot of nonsense to it. Those things take time. Yes, you do have AI that can do it for you, but I've used it a couple of times, Adobe's thing, and it has some drawbacks. But it all starts with capturing really good audio at the start. If you can do that by yourself and you're just looking for someone else to elevate it to the next level with sound design and proper production, then I think you're on a winning page. But if you the type of person who sort of struggles to, I know someone who is not very technically inclined, and there's just no way this person can record and edit a podcast at a really good quality, just because the person, I'll refrain from saying whether it's a male or female. So the person
He glanced to the side of the room, so I don't know if that's an indicator.
You're also on the side.
yeah. So, but
Lindsay knows how shit my stuff is. I don't.
to that point, if you're going to be doing it yourself, right? And I know you're not doing it, but you have it there, so it's cool. Like, wear headphones, right? While you're recording, if you are recording,
Some phones. Wear the headphones, please, bro.
because if you're not wearing headphones,
I'll wear the.
No, you don't have to wear it now.
Road.
You don't have to wear them now. We've got the guys on hand over here.
you're not listening to what you're recording, and that's important, because the minute you hear, someone's too far away from the mic, you can actually, sit down or move the mic closer to them and start capturing really good audio. That helps the process when it comes to editing, because the worse the audio is, the longer it's going to take to clean up, unfortunately.
Yeah, you can't polish a turd, huh?
But there's
You can, it will be a polished turd.
there's three very purist views, and Simi, not to say you're not purist, but I think your stuff more is about putting your personality through.
Yeah.
So I mean, what wins? I mean,
The content will always be more important than the audio quality. Like, hands down. Like, if I watch like world star videos, when guys get into fights, like, that's my TikTok page. And like, they don't have like HD visuals. They don't have HD audio. It's just some guy going world star and then a fight ensues. If the content is good, I want to see how the guy knocks the other guy out in the streets. I don't care about the lighting and stuff, but like, when it comes to audio specifically, a lot of guys think that they have amazing audio. So like, they'll go into the studio, they record all the stuff, they have these interviews, and maybe the content is just boring. So you can have all the tools in the world. This Rodecaster, I have the first version of it, that Rodecaster Pro. Thing changed my life. Because I could put someone on a cell phone, Bluetooth. I'd worked that machine out so well. You can't beat me when it comes to using that machine, right? Turns out, I can't take that thing outside unless I've got like the battery pack, right? So I'm just like, oh, okay, so now I'm going to have to have a few drawbacks of bad audio, but my content now is banging. It's banging. As soon as I get something that is portable like that, I'll take it outside. But I mean, that's good for the content matters. If your audio is shitty, you can kind of make it a little bit better. But if it's like really good audio, I remember when Jacob Zuma was still around and he had the Jacob Zuma spy tapes. It was recorded with someone's phone. 180,000 listens on Eyewitness News. There's 180,000 people that wanted to hear what was going on. It sounded like it was recorded in a toilet. It probably was. But the people listened. So content is very important. That's not to say that don't focus on your audio quality. Man, if you are having a boring conversation and you have put this podcast out into the world and that audio quality is caca, they will not listen to that thing. Simple as that.
yeah, it's that 100% balance right down. You're either a good storyteller, you're a good technician. So
I want to add one thing. So you see, it's like windy today, right?
Yeah.
On Sunday, it was also windy. I did another podcast recording. And when wind would happen, as a good broadcaster, I would know that, okay, cool, maybe it's going to fuck around with my microphone. So I would say the thing again. Because in the edits, I know I can make it better. Those are tricks that you learn from making bad audio, making that mistake the first time. Like going like, okay, cool, maybe this isn't the best place for me to sit here because the wind is blowing right through this little tunnel that I'm in. So you learn those things, but you have to get a good pair of headphones. That's the thing I would always say.
Yeah.
Headphones will tell you immediately if it sounds good or not.
I also think there's an element of your audience also just understanding that that's the compromise I'm going to go with, you know. Sean, what's in terms of your audience, how much interaction and engagement do you have with them? I gave you some feedback the other day.
You did.
So Sean did a fantastic, John Sene, right?
Take
Heard him 100 times, had him on one of the podcasts we produce, and Sean got a conversation out of him in a style that I've never heard before, to the point that I asked you, are you guys friends? Do you know each other? It's like, no, I met him before, right? So there's obviously something in the way you can talk to people that brings something out. Do you get that sort of feedback from your audience and listeners? Do you put that into what you're producing? How important is that to you in your process?
Again, thank you for that compliment. The audio that I did with John, you're quite right. I met him 5 minutes before we started doing the interview. I think the reason the story came out the way that it did is because I sat on it for a very long time, trying to figure out how I was going to bring it across to the audience that it would resonate with them. But the recording itself went very well. So there was obviously a rapport that we built very, very quickly. I think in a lot of the stuff that I do, I get quite vulnerable very quickly. And that generally breaks walls down, which allows for somebody then to be vulnerable with me, which then allows for them to tell stories better than they would if they weren't in that space. So I guess it's, I don't know, I just have a very complex life. And in that way, I've just incorporated those things. So I tell stories and then quickly somebody shares that with their side of something with me. To clue you in, I have a child with special needs. She has epilepsy. She has developmental delays. She's in a wheelchair. She's on a feeding system. There's loads of things going on with her. So there's always something for somebody to connect with that story almost immediately. And because I can share just a little bit, that opens them up. It kind of drops walls, I think, very quickly. And then it's like speaking to somebody that I've never met before, but on a level where they know me because I've shared an intimate detail. So then when I put my audio together, and as Lindsay has now said, the longer you sit on it, the less, I suppose, it's going to cost you more. It costs me a lot in terms of the time. That episode was actually recorded in June of last year. I just didn't know how I was going to string it together. I think I eventually did it in a relatively good way. And similarly, all the other interviews I've done, I've got 6 episodes of my podcast are up. It's called Some Assembly Required. And there are only 6 episodes, but I recorded all of them last year. They've only just been releasing them because I take a long time to figure out how I'm going to string the story together. I really like audio little bits and pieces. I like the fact that every 60 to 90 seconds, there's something else that happens in the audio that keeps you engaged with what's going on. It's not just I say something, you say something, I say something, you say something. It's good. But I really enjoy doing interviews. I really enjoy speaking to people. So how do I make that interesting, that it's not just me say something, you say something? Yeah, I didn't even know if I answered your question now.
So, I mean, let me throw it over to Catherine and Nicole. Engelbrecht is here as well, like true crime podcasters. I had a conversation the other day with somebody about the resonance of true crime podcasts in South Africa, and this is maybe the audience question again. Is that it? I mean, I'm going to negate myself for you to do outrageously successful podcasts. People saying, is there a growth limitation to it because it's possibly too close to home? So if we take the real success stories, Devil's Dorp really worked because it was so bizarre, but Missing Woman, that kind of story is like so much in the news. How does your audience relate to that? What do you look for that it goes, I don't want this to sound like a news report. I don't want it to sound too close because it is really close. How do you make it something that's appealing to South Africans without having that, turn-off factor? Maybe that's a way of like looking at this audience question.
True crime some people just absolutely love it. And as you say, there is this fatigue. There's this fatigue about bad news, but somehow people find it an escape. Missing Matthew, which was a true crime series I did about a little boy who went missing in 1997, for me, I took that story because that was one of the first stories I did when I was a young journalist. So I was able to really go back to those years when I knew the family. I knew when their child had first gone missing and what had happened to them since then. And so many things had happened. It didn't just become, it wasn't just about their son who went missing. It became about all the families that they've helped since he went missing, because they then started their own organization for missing children. And I think true crime is a tricky genre, but I think there's so many different avenues that you can go off on, depending on what kind of storyteller you are. I mean, I know Nicole, and it would be great to chat to you afterwards, but it depends on what kind of story you want to tell. And for me, the true crime genres that the way I like telling those stories is to really go off on those side avenues. What happened to those people? What happened to the children what happened to the siblings of missing Matthew? What happened to his siblings? They were bullied at school. They had their own terrible fallouts that happened. And then it just sucks you into these characters, these real life characters. And in many of these stories, there's no resolution. In the disappearance of Nusseibeh Hassan, there's no resolution. In the Englot story, nobody has actually been convicted of her murder. In Missing Matthew, a body has never been found. But it can trigger, hopefully, somebody coming forward and saying, well, I do remember something that happened. So I sort of go into those stories because it's a tricky thing, and I'm sure Nicole can speak to that as well. You're scratching open a wound for a family that is incredibly painful. And I remember the first time I phoned Michelle Olsen, who was the mother of Matthew, and I said, hi, it's Catherine, I met you many years ago when I was working at Cape Talk, and I'd met them over the years, and I really liked this woman. I'm a mother. It's just a heartbreaking thing that your child is missing. You have no idea where they are. And she was reluctant at first. And it took me a couple of phone calls. And I said, look, I don't want to do anything that's going to make you feel uncomfortable. And if you don't want to do it, I totally understand. And at the end of it all, when everything was said and done and we had the 3-part series out, I questioned whether it was worth it for her. She's the one who's opened herself up. Nothing has come from it in terms of developments in the story. Yes, it was back in the public eye for a little while, but how many people really listened to it? It is a difficult question and an uncomfortable question for people doing these podcasts, because how much of it is sensationalism, where we just really, inviting people to listen to horror stories, it's their way of distracting themselves from their own lives, and how much of it is really for the good. And I think, Nicole, as I've read stuff where you've talked about how you want your stories to be victim-based. And for me, I like the idea of justice, that there could be a justice resolution. There's just been a case in the States. Teacher's Pet, a brilliant podcast. That guy murdered his wife, 40 years ago. A podcast was done, a series, and he's now been arrested. The same with Serial. Those are very high-level podcasts that are excellent, but that is the inspiration for what I do, and that is, the ultimate.
I just want to add one thing. Nicole's podcast, right? Hands down, in this room, can't beat her. Can't beat Nicole.
I called her the first lady of South African podcasting.
You can't beat Nicole. As an independent podcaster, you cannot beat her. The guys from Apple, when they speak to me, they speak about Nicole. They'll be like, yo, do you know that lady from True Crime South Africa? And I have to lie to them. Because I don't, at one point, I used to see Nicole just go up the charts. I'm like, man, this person is killing it. I met her just recently, maybe online about a month and a half ago. And Nicole is by herself on this thing. If there's an independent podcaster out there that is killing it, it's Nicole. Sorry for the pun of the killing. Sorry. But just destroying it. And then the other day, maybe you could share some insights with us about how you actually keep it running.
Yeah.
Because if you're throwing your own money at it, first I want to know how much money you throw at it. Because I know how much money I throw at my podcast. And I have a network of podcasts. I have 8 podcasts that people produce. I know how much money in a month I must throw to help keep the consistency of that. So your one is a massive podcast that's shared on Times Live's network, your own network, Jacaranda, and how? One person, how?
And sorry, Simi, she can tell you more, but she's done companion podcasts as well for TV shows.
Wow.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. And I think Nicole's, the fact that her podcasts are doing so well, and far better than my true crime narrative podcast did, it's interesting because, I'm not sure how long it takes for you to put together your podcast, which you bring out on a weekly basis. My narrative podcasts would take months, absolute months of really laboring over the choice of music and where to put this and who to, chasing down somebody else. Yet Nicole is putting on podcasts that people really want. So
do you want to answer any of these, Nicole?
We're talking about you.
Hi. So yeah, happy to be here. Thanks so much. Thank you for all the very kind things that you've all said. It has been a crazy journey. I started, so listening to what Lindsay was saying, I was chuckling a bit to myself because I started the podcast 3 years ago. I was a sales manager for a packaging company. I'd never done anything vaguely related to sound production, podcasting, journalism, anything along that vein, and thought I was going to work for myself. And pretty much, as Simi referred to, taught myself everything from scratch using YouTube. You're all going to laugh, but I still use my original. So I use a cardboard box that's lined with foam. And
I literally saw Lindsay's skin crawl. I literally just watched it.
Hey, listen, if it works, it works.
It
works. Yeah, it works.
Watch a crawl and watch a podcast time up. No, it's good sound. It's perhaps not. I'm sure, if someone like yourself listened to it, you'd pick up things that you could fix. If I could take you home with me, I'd gladly do so. But I work with what I've got. So it's a cardboard box lined with foam. It's got my microphone inside. It's a USB that runs to my laptop, and I do everything myself.
You edit yourself.
Yeah, I record. So I record myself, research, write the scripts.
You do the research yourself.
I do all the research myself too. Yeah.
So you don't pay anybody.
And listen, we're talking.
Wait. I'll come back.
Okay,
Well, after the best podcast, me, Samir, of today, I have Nicole Ingebrigtsen. Nicole, I need to know because monetization is going to come up here. Let me segue for you.
Thank you.
Do you make money to cover the costs of making your podcast?
I am starting to now, yeah.
Okay.
So monetization has come along. As Catherine alluded to, the difficulty of the genre, that one of the biggest difficulties for me was going to be monetizing it.
Yeah.
Because how do I monetize someone else's pain?
Yeah.
So I had to make sure that I was doing something that I was proud of, that was creating real world results, which I'm grateful to say it is now doing. It is bringing in leads. It's helping victims' families. There's lots of offshoots that have happened from it that are positive, that I'm proud of. And as a result, I'm now okay with taking money from sponsors. So I've also been very lucky in that I've never had to approach a sponsor. They have approached me to sponsor the podcast, and 9 times out of 10, that's been because either they're listeners or they've come to understand what the True Crime South Africa brand represents and what I'm aiming for, and they want to align with that brand. So I mean, the sponsors that I've got cover my costs. Am I killing it? No. Am I still, I've just released my first true crime book, so that's something else I do. I still write articles on a freelance basis. I've managed to, over the years, bring it down, the number of different freelance jobs I'm doing. At one point in 2019, I was working for 7 different companies.
Wow.
Went from working, 9 to 5 for an employer and to working pretty much 17, 18 hours a day for myself, and would not change a thing. So it's been fantastic. I love Catherine's work. I've got huge respect for what she does. I think that the true crime genre in South Africa is very untapped. I mentor a group that are a group of true crime creators in podcasting and YouTube to try and grow the space, because it's never, for me, I think, and I'm sure Catherine will agree, in our genre, there's no such thing as competition because these stories don't belong to us. Whereas maybe an art podcast or a fashion podcast, they might see another podcaster who does something exactly the same as competition for their audience. For me, there's no such thing. I'm telling the story in a way that my audience resonates with. They like the way I think. Many of them don't like the way I think, and then they stop listening, which is cool as well. And I'm telling victims of violent crime stories in South Africa that didn't get the headlines. So for me, it's been a passion project. And I think that's where the crazy, insane success of the podcast has come from. Everyone just wants to be along for the ride, and they've helped get it where it is.
Just out of interest, how long does it take you to put one episode together?
So I'm currently
on average.
A very difficult situation. Well, I've been in the situation for the last 3 years where I have committed to, I've got more adverts booked than content. So I have no choice but to put out a full case episode every single week to satisfy the sponsors that I've taken on board. So I have to produce a full case episode every week, and I have no case episodes in the bag. So
Don't say that to me. I get an email from you once a week for me to upload. Don't say that.
So to answer your question, there's lots of pots on the boil, at a time. I do a lot more solved than unsolved because the solved are a hell of a lot easier to research and cover. But pretty much on a Monday, I will start taking the research that I've gathered in bits and pieces, throughout whenever I've been focusing on it, start writing my script. Wednesday, I'm recording. Thursday, I'm editing. Friday, sometimes Saturday, I'm releasing, and Monday we start again. And I've been doing that for the last 3 years.
Oh no, Nicole is killing it. I can't tell you. I'd copy paste her model. She has an audience, monetize the audience, make the content for that audience.
And I think we're wrapped up. I think that's. But Simi, do you feel? I mean, we spent a fair time talking about true crime podcasts. I mean, Simi, do you feel there's like a golden bullet in the type of content South Africans are going to resonate or gravitate to? Obviously, true crime is quite big internationally, but do you think there's something in South Africa we're missing? What South Africans want?
It's the data dictates it, right? So I sit in a lot of these high-level meetings with all these guys from around the world discussing data. Because as POC podcasts, we get a lot of data. And I've realized over time that data is highly precious, because when I go to another company and stuff, I say, hey, this thing works, this thing doesn't work. So when I was in Dubai recently, I was with Apple, and Apple told me, hey, we have such a big void for true crime in South Africa. Even though Nicole's podcast exists, people want to find something else other than Nicole, which is fair, right? True crime, sport, which is weird because South Africa is a top-tier sporting nation, lack of sport. And then they've told me they're just like humor.
Yeah.
They're like, a lot of people think that a talking heads podcast like us, the 5 of us sit over here, we talk, people want to listen to that. Actually, they don't. I've got a new podcast coming out of myself. It's just my thoughts. I use a Rode Wireless Go 2. I clip it on me over here. I go out into the streets, and every single time I engage with people and I tell a funny story, clip, that thing gives me 8 hours of recording. That's a working day. Humor, true crime, sports. Markets are dying for it. What people don't understand, though, is the advertisers don't understand. Like, selling something to people I find incredibly tough, because in my company, I'm the CEO, CFO, COO, I'm the marketer, I'm the sales manager, I'm the editor and everything. I find I'm not good at the vast majority of those things. But making good content, I'm good at. Marketing, suck at.
So, Sean, we were having a similar conversation earlier. So, because ultimately most podcasters they just want to make stuff. They just want to make and sit and record for 8 hours. What do you feel advertisers, brands, ad agencies, etc., what do you think they need to understand about podcasting? I mean, let's maybe bring the data question in. Do you think they need to understand the data? Do you think we need to understand the data? Do you think we need to tell a better story that they understand there's money behind this?
Did anybody read or listen to Tom Webster's Sounds Profitable of the newsletter this week? No. Okay, so
is that on the Pot News?
Yes.
Yeah.
So essentially, he was telling the story about the curse of knowledge, and I'll try and abbreviate it as best I can, as quickly as I can. But he was effectively saying that if we've been fed information as a consumer for a period of time, we've built up our belief system around that, right? And he tells a story about a box that's got glass in it that you need to tilt at a certain angle, because if you're having it upright and you open the box, obviously the glass is going to fall out. But the label to say that is on the inside of the glass, because obviously if you tilt the box, the stuff's going to fall out and break. right? You have this knowledge. But if somebody else doesn't understand that, they've got this other base of knowledge that they're working from. So essentially what he tries to do is he brings you around a roundabout with a story that essentially says, if you have heard about podcasting before, but you listen to a podcast where the audio wasn't great, or you listen to a podcast that didn't resonate with you, or you listen to a podcast that wasn't quite your thing, and now you've made up your mind that podcast sucks and you don't like them, right? So we now need to, as podcasters, we keep saying, but you probably haven't found the right one yet, or you should really listen to this because this guy makes really great content. But if that's not answering a pain point for that person, they're still not going to enjoy listening to that content, or they're still not going to go back and listen to that content. You really need to find the right piece of content that fixes that person's pain point for them to go, hang on a second, I get this now, right? So I think maybe from an advertising or even from a radio station perspective, to figure out what that is for your radio listener, who I still think is different to a podcast listener. I don't see them as competing. I see them as working symbiotically. I really think there's good ways to combine both industries. And I think the radio industry is really going to help the podcasting industry be seen across.
Yeah, once they accept independent podcasters.
Right.
I mean, the biggest problem with radio industry is that they just think they can copy and paste it, right?
Yeah.
They throw enough money at it, we can create the same thing. But I go, how many great radio stations, there's radio stations in the country, how many great podcasts have they produced?
Yeah. Can I tell you a story from when I was hosting an afternoon drive show? They would take the drive show, cut all of the music, stitch the audio back together, put it up podcast and go and say, listen to the podcast. I go,
Audio archivist.
If you were to listen to that as a radio listener and you listen back without the music, remember when you switch the radio on, you're there for the music. It's nice to have the banter with the presenter Bradeen, but you're there for the music. Whereas somebody that tunes in for a podcast is already committed to listen to that content.
Yeah, radio stations need to do what they did about a decade ago when they started employing people for social media, right?
Yeah.
So you go okay, cool, this guy understands social media. I'll employ this guy to help with my social media.
Yeah.
They actually need to go, radio stations need to go find people in podcasts, be like, this guy understands podcasts. Let me make this guy make podcasts with us. That's what they need to do. Cake Talk, ironically enough, have 180,000 listeners.
Yeah.
Online.
Yeah.
They are not a radio station. They could easily become Africa's biggest podcast station. Will they do it? Nope.
So, Lindsay, why don't you think? So, because you and I, you've worked in enough radio stations. We still work with radio stations. We straddle both sides. We also understand which side, how our bread is buttered. But from seeing both perspectives, why do you think radio stations just wouldn't do that? Because it seems like we've got all the answers in this room.
Yeah. I don't know. I think they perhaps too stuck in their ways with their formulas and their programming clocks that they don't want to change much.
Or maybe our 2,000 listeners mean nothing to them. I mean, maybe we could just consider that, right?
Maybe.
I mean, there's a harsh reality to it, right?
Yeah. I just think, they don't want to change the mold that drastically, because it's always worked for them, the format of radio, and it might very well work for them, but I don't think that they want to cross over and join the two, as you say, in some way.
So here's my thought. Radio is still outrageously popular in this country. When you speak to international people about radio in this country, they cannot believe the listeners we still have, right?
Will always be.
And a large part of that is because it's not necessarily catering for English speakers, right? Simi, you're the one who introduced this term to me of local language.
Local language.
When you go internationally, they talk local language.
Yep.
That's the growth, right? I said, if you do not have a local language podcast strategy, you do not have a podcast strategy, right?
Yeah, local languages are important. So another thing that we speak about.
Why isn't there a local language true crime podcast, right? I think there is one. I think there is one, actually.
I think there's two, according to my research. But actually, a conversation Nicole and I had a while back was about local languages, local language podcasts. It's something that at POC Podcast we look to do. The numbers are just so good. They're so good. If you do something in isiXhosa or Afrikaans, you're guaranteeing yourself minimum of a 3,000 download, which people go oh, that's small. In South Africa, let me tell you, if anybody tells you they're knocking over 1,500 downloads, you go oh, you're 0.001% of the podcast population. Yeah, it's cool. And if you meet 10 people that are telling you that, all 10 of them are liars.
Well, it's like all our Spotify Wrapped. They're all in the top 5% of podcasts.
So I know local languages work. We invest. We did 2 podcasts we've got one in science called Lugu, which is Zulu. We've got another one called Omikafir, which is in Afrikaans. Those numbers don't lie. If I had the money to pay again for them, I would. I don't. because I'm a type of guy that likes to trial something, see if it works, get the data from it, and if I can go find someone to sponsor it and give me money for it, I'll go there. But true crime in a local language will kill. Local languages over here work. That's why radio in this country, of course, FM.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to start wrapping up. So if you have any questions, just to have them on standby.
Just quickly, I want to add something back on the subject about monetization. From a purist in inverted commas, I think if you're looking to monetize your podcast, from an audio perspective, we're not including video in this, right? It kind of has to be a polished thing because big brands and stuff, at least in my opinion, some you might feel differently, and that's cool. But at least in my opinion, if a brand is going to come on board and sponsor and give you an ad to read in the middle, your quality already has to be up there. They're not going to come on board and
no, you're right,
and hope that you get better along the way. Yeah. If you look at all these YouTubers, whether you call them podcasters or YouTubers, they're all creating content with a visual aspect. And the ones that are highly popular, even like a Joe Rogan, the quality is really consistent week in, week out. You can't fault it. And I think the quality, bad quality, should be more the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah, I don't think an advertiser, firstly, listen on somebody's is incredibly polished. Like when you watch it, it looks like it can be done by anybody. It actually can't.
Only by you.
Yeah. And it's really polished. So an advertiser would jump on that. An advertiser's not going to jump on bad audio. Where I think advertisers do go wrong, though, is that they decide, we're going to make our own podcast, guys. How many downloads is that going to get? No audience. And from no audience, I mean, now you're starting off just as any other. You're no different to an independent podcaster other than you've paid a lot of money for that.
Yeah.
You paid a lot of money for it.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying that maybe advertisers should actually just find people. You find kids, bro. The kids do it and they get it and they just get scared at giving money to kids because they don't know what they'll do with it. If Nick Nax gave me 100,000 rand, I know exactly what I would do with it. And some buck.
So I want to close off with kind of where podcasting was versus where it is now. A guy, John B. Franco, is some podcast consultant in the US. And I resonate with this, right? Because I worked on one of these. Old podcasting was about building your own profile, engaging in self-indulgent chats with your heroes, shallow talks and speculations, just quite frankly, a tacky direct sales channel and a way to stroke your ego. But new podcasting is about focusing on thought-provoking questions and challenges. And Catherine, you spoke to that. Inspiring ways of acting together, amplifying voices of the unheard, empowering listener journeys, and building strong communities. I mean, is there anything, I'll go through each one of you, Gaston and Catherine, is there anything in there you do resonate with that? Do you agree? You think that's kind of the movement we've had in podcasting? Do you see that?
I think for me, what is great about podcasting and great about living in South Africa is that there are so many stories. We have so much more material than any other country because we have so many problems. So whatever you're interested in, there is a space for it. And if we could collaborate more, I know Simi and the three of you are multi-skilled, and maybe my skills lack, and I'm sure Nicole's felt this too. But to get podcasts to the level of those overseas podcasts, I think there does need to be more collaboration because you can't be all things at once. And so, I think it's an exciting place to be at the moment. People want to listen to podcasts. I mean, I don't know what the stats are, and I know it comes down to the data, but I think it's growing all the time. And I went to a podcasting, it was a radio workshop about a couple of weeks ago, and they had a listening party, and I thought it was so great. And it was all these young African kids from across Africa who'd come to South Africa, and they'd done these amazing stories. They were all given the task to do a profile, and they'd had everything from a trans guy to, a woman who'd been burnt by her father, just crazy stories. And they were so creative. The creativity that we have in this country is incredible. And I agree with Simi. The young have so many things to say, and they are so good technically, and they are so great and so enthusiastic. And it was a very inspiring thing to go and have this listening party. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Anyway, you're next.
Am I?
I mean, do you agree with that, Sean? That
message that you read a little earlier.
Anything there stands out for you?
Yeah, I think so. I can't say that I strongly disagree with anything. I haven't been podcasting for long enough to say that it was what it was when he says old podcasting and new podcasting. I don't know if I have a comparison to make. I'm very excited about the space, as I think everybody here is. And I definitely feel that there needs to be sort of a bottom-up, top-down sort of combination of things. Along some of the points made today, I feel that when I worked in radio, it was very much about us against them. And you were always jostling for a position on air, or you were always against that. Those listeners were very loyal for this radio station. But the sense I've already received in podcasting is already that it is far more open to collaboration, to talking, to sharing, to understanding how you did that. Oh, wait, do you use that program? But how does that work? And maybe it's because so many of us have come from a background where, I came from a radio background, but not understanding of the technical, how to record, how to tell the story. You're asking someone a question as opposed to Googling it. Immediately, we've started a conversation. There's a dialogue and we're connecting. So I feel there's more of a community that is growing around podcasting. And I think maybe that was the last point you'd made about the sort of like a community of audience that's developing. I'd love to see it grow, and hopefully events like this do just that.
I mean, Lindsay, when you and I started speaking about when I actually was going to invite you to be on the panel, you actually said to me, you're looking for somebody, you want to help someone's podcast and kind of like add your skills to someone's great story.
Yes, in addition to Ronman's podcast. But yeah.
You know, so I mean, that obviously resonates with you because you've got a skill set that maybe your clients aren't giving you, or an ability or opportunity that you're going, hey, let me take, and you've seen the gap today.
Yeah. I mean, by and large, you were talking about how you edited the John Sane podcast, and I had to listen to it, and I thought it was really well done the way you structured it. And by and large, people are, when they're doing those sort of interview kind of questions, they're just going back and forth, asking questions, answering, and you could certainly spruce it up in the way that that Sean did, and I could certainly help with that.
Well, that's it. And Simi, I kind of want to leave the last word of the panel to you as the guy who I started off. You get it. Right? What do you see as everything we've said today as the kind of next step? What do you see as what's coming that maybe all of us, we kind of figured this out, but you're exposed to a lot, and you see if this is old podcasting versus new podcasting, what's new podcasting?
Firstly, podcasts have been around since the 90s. NPR did it first before they did what's it called, American... My American Story, something like that.
Yeah. My American Life.
Yeah, My American Life. Yeah. Before it was called My American Life, it was just on NPR. So podcasts have been around forever. I kind of agree with some of the stuff that he says, though, because I mean, like, those are the run-of-the-mill generic type of podcast things you see, right? Person X speaks to person Y. 30 minutes, never get that time back. I think in an African context, I would look at what they're doing in Kenya. Man, they got a podcast ecosystem that South Africa can't even come close to at this moment in time. Nigeria, I'll go look what they're doing over there. And you see the same tropes. Young kids who identify in a certain way, that are pushing they're leaning into their content and what their shtick is. And people see that and go, there's something there.
Got a couple of questions if anyone wants to comment on.
So I think my main question is, like, I look at you three sitting there, and I had a podcast. I've got the thing pinned on my desk that says the people you passed, which was the people on the promenade that I walked past, just never started it. True crime, I've started in my head 1,000 times. Mental health, I've started in my head 1,000 times. And I know the solution is like, just start. But what was the thing that got you to go from that, maybe I should start this, to actually recording?
Yeah, I just recorded. I mean, also when I started, I was like in my early 20s, like the amount of mistakes I made before lesson on somebody's actually took off were incredible. I used to record in a storeroom at the back of a comedy club with only comedians. I just pressed record. I just knew how to do it. And then you just get better and better at doing it, right? Malcolm Gladwell, the only thing I agree with him is those 10,000 hours. Other than that, I don't agree with him on anything else. I just record. So like all those ideas, man, those are great ideas. You can still do them. No one owns the license of any of those ideas. Just go record it.
I've also been like that, like mental health, all these different things. But how do you actually, I think you've got to be really interested in the story that you're doing. So the kind of podcasts that I like doing, the narrative podcasts, You've got to find a story that is going to keep you interested for 9 months. And I mean, I've just left News 24. I'm freelancing, and I found the story. I know what I want to do a story on, but now it's a question of how am I going to actually do it without the technical skills that I had support with and all those things. So I am just going to be getting all your numbers after this. But it's about really feeling passionate about the story that you're doing and why you want to do it, I think.
I know you didn't ask me, but I'll give you my answer anyway. Good afternoon, I'm Alex, and I've created this event a few times in my head too. If you don't look back at your work from the beginning and cringe or feel a little bit embarrassed, you've done something wrong too. Yet there is a sense of growth and development. But I also want to segue a bit into monetizing and the future. Some esteemed people on the panel. The rise of chat GPT and AI, there is a sense that if you have all this computer automation, that perhaps people are not as easy to be able to distinguish between what's a human creating something and what's a computer. But yet there's always that element of voice. And I remember in the last 6 months seeing some article where Google wouldn't list you in the first 2 pages if you didn't have some element of voice in your website in the next, 2 years, 3 years. But just your thoughts, anyone's thoughts really. I think that there's a space for us podcasters to say we've got something different. I'm a real person and this is me speaking.
I've got an answer for you. It's not actually my answer. It's David Guetta's answer. David Guetta, because he, one of his parties in the last week or 2 weeks, he made a beat. He used an AI bot of something to say, write me lyrics in the style of Eminem, and it did, and all of that, and he played it out, and people went nuts, right? And this is what he said. Nothing is going to replace taste. What defines an artist is you have a certain taste, you have a certain type of emotion, and you want to express, and you're going to use all the modern instruments to achieve that. So, yes, ChatGPT is here, but the human person for now still has more taste and emotion than ChatGPT. That's my answer.
Well, I like that answer. Thanks, Lindsay. But also it brings me back to my day job where I fly airplanes for a living. And when you talk about AI, single pilot or remote piloted airplanes, people often ask, so when is it going to be that airliners will fly without pilots? And I think it's the first day that passengers buy tickets with airplanes without pilots.
This has been great. Thank you. That's 100% right. I mean, and Simi, how's your podcast? You wanted?
Yeah, we've got an AI podcast.
You got?
Yeah, we've got an AI podcast where people submit their stories to us. Like they can choose. Like we had the first one was the cat who meets a cat who commits a murder. We put it through like ChatGPT to write it like a 3,000 word script. I again go to another audio AI program where I put the script through in a South African accent, where the guy reads it, and then we take it, we edit it up, we add some background effects and stuff. Haven't found an AI tool for that quite yet. And then I put it out, and people can listen to it. Cost me in total 15 cents USD.
Wow, that's
so, but also, like I said, a failed experiment.
Right.
Like maybe I get like failed experiment. Maybe I got about maybe 90 listens is the highest.
Yeah, but
that podcast has got it.
You're figuring it out.
I'm figuring it out. Right?
You'll need.
So, but clearly, like, there's that you can improve on that idea because maybe I don't know the correct prompt on Chat GPT to give me a more riveting story. So now I start developing that. But I mean, like, I use AI so much these days, I'm not even going to fight it.
Just a question about editing versus narrative storytelling and kind of like good audio being table stakes these days. So I think there are some comedians who can get away with recording on their phone in the toilet, whatever it is. But like for most people, if you hear good audio, you're going to keep listening. And if you don't, then you might be like, okay, I'm really negative about this. But when it comes to, for example, Sean, who's producing podcasts for other people, when you get to the point where you can't handle all the work now, right? There's a difference between editing the audio and telling the story, right? So what's a good workflow where someone can, whether I guess the creative director or whatever it is, can still tell the story while effectively getting better audio? Because for a lot of audio engineers, they're not trained for like, cool, let me listen to 12 hours of recordings and then create a story out of it, Yeah. So how would you suggest you go about like expanding your capacity while still maintaining like a narrative?
So from my experience, I've had many years of working in talk radio, and that really gave me a good basis to edit, kind of like a radio host and a journalist in a way, because with radio, time is of the essence. You only have that slot before you go to news, before you do a whole host of things, and you move on. You don't ever come back to it. So keeping things in context is really key. And I think you learn this along the way. At least I've learned it along the way, that you learn to make a decision if the creative producer's not there about when the point has been made and when you can move on to the next point or chapter in the story. Otherwise, you just end up waffling for the sake of filling time. And so for me, that skill is developed over time. And I developed that skill working in talk radio, where you need to keep things concise, to the point, but still in context, without losing the essence of the interview or the story or whatever the case is.
Getting back to AI tools that help. So I've got clients, for example, that I will edit and produce for. And a lot of the time, I'm not the subject matter expert on those topics. So I pull everything into Descript, which is a text-based thing that ties it in with audio. And then my clients will be users on that session, and they will edit to text. And they don't have to worry about gaps and repetitions and pauses. They just put the context in the content into an order that they want. That then spits out an AAF file that I can import into Logic or Pro Tools or whatever, and then chop that audio according to what they want. So there are tools that help you work well. When one person is doing content and the other person is editing.
Well, actually, Adobe Podcast's new platform, which is in the beta phase.
Yeah.
The audio is in the background, but you're editing text, on your screen. So when you want to remove a paragraph, you just highlight the text and you delete, and it takes that away. They've also bring in a thing where it's taking away ms and rs and
same as Descript.
Descript, yeah.
Although I will say that AI podcast, like the AI voice enhancement tool, is terrifyingly good.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just getting people to send me voice notes, and then I run them through that, and they sound like they're in the studio.
It does have some limitations, I've found. If the audio, let's say someone was like off mic, right? And I've used that enhanced thing. Someone's off mic and their projection is not really well, and they sort of tape off towards the end of the sentence. I was making the point. They tape off towards the end of the sentence. You put that through the Adobe Enhance. Sometimes it won't recognize it as a word. It will just remove it.
Yeah.
So you can't blanket process it without having some artifacts. Again, comes back to, if your audio is really well recorded, your mic placement is good, it's going to recognize the word because it can, and it will keep it in there.
Yeah, I'm because I'm making a show that uses some voice notes as part of the research. I'm very interested to see whether kind of an AI enhanced sound with a few glitches, because you can sometimes hear digital artifacts, will work better than just the crappy voice note.
Yeah.
Which you're getting all the audio, but it doesn't sound as good, but it also feels more authentic. Like, I don't know which is right.
I think there's a balance.
My thing always is it's okay to have people on voice notes. It's okay to have people, I remember Simi's podcast is, guys, he's in the street, so if you contextualize it that way and say, we're in the studio, but our guest is, on a boat, whatever the case. If you contextualize, your audience is a lot more forgiving of, as long as the audio is still audible and not unpleasant to listen to.
But that's a phenomenal thing. And it just kind of, when you think you've figured podcasting out, there comes a whole new, remit into it to consider. I'm going to wrap it up. Listen, it's been a phenomenal day. And I think what a lot of people listening to this podcast won't have seen is every time somebody mentions, I could get help here, they're physically pointing at each other. And that's the point of events like these, is to take us off LinkedIn pages and start putting us in rooms with each other, because we can all help each other and grow the industry. And that's the only way we're ever going to monetize, grow audience, grow listeners, and just make this what all of us in this room believe it can be. Thank you to each one of my panelists. Thank you to the guys from Rode. Your setup here has been phenomenal. I mean, really above and beyond. All the toys are here.
They're shouting you out. They're saying the guys from Rode. This is that clap was for you.
Thank you to the guests who came through today. I mean, there's great support for this. Hopefully the first of many. Well, thank you, panel. Thank you, everybody. I hope you've had a good time. All right.
Thank you for putting it together.
Yeah.